Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War. This episode covers themes of physical and emotional abuse as well as suicide. If you need support, please follow the links in the episode description.
And even when we were exhausted or we were in pain, it doesn't matter for them. It was cruel at the time. And I often cried, and for crying you got punished too. I cried a lot during this time in bed in the evening under the blanket when no one could hear me.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Kerstin recounts her harrowing childhood and life experiences in East Germany. She was identified at a young age for elite sports training, which led to intense gymnastics regimens, physical and emotional abuse, and state-sponsored doping. When she was dismissed from the sports program without warning, her personal life deteriorated further after her father's death, and she turned to alcohol and self-destructive behaviour. Despite enduring severe trauma, Kerstin ultimately found healing and reconciliation with her past. I'm delighted to welcome Kerstin to our Cold War conversation. This episode covers themes of physical and emotional abuse as well as suicide. If you need support, please follow the links in the episode description.
I was born in Leipzig, the former GDR, and it was 1970.
What did your parents do?
My father was a carpenter and my mother worked in kindergarten.
What was their view of the East German government?
My father can't remember that he is very interested in politics. And in case of my mom, it was more like she wanted always to be conform with the state and not giving any disturbance. So,
Was there anybody else in your family?
yeah, I have a brother and he is 6 years older than me. And we never discussed politics.
Where did you live? What was your living accommodation like?
It was Leipzig Nordost, and it was very old constructions. And it used to be where normal workers lived during the World War. And since World War, nothing has changed much, actually. For instance, we had the toilet, not in the flat. It was half the steps up or down. It was not in our living space. Or we didn't own a washing machine, so we had to go downstairs in the backyard, and there were a little house where the whole people from our house washed their clothes. There were this huge kettle, so we didn't have a washing machine.
Before you got involved in sport, what were your interests as a child?
When I was very young, I actually can't remember much because I started sports when I was 5 or 6. And before that, kids were brought to the kindergarten very early. I was 4 weeks old when I did go to the kindergarten. And I played with the other kids there, but there wasn't something special, I would say.
And what was school like for you?
School was pretty intense because in first grade I started sport, and it meant I had school at first, like the other kids, and after the school hours, a bus came and brought us to the training center. And in school, it was difficult because I had to be good in the school also. And for instance, after school and after the sports, I had to do my homework, went to sleep, and the next day it was the same. And we also had school on Saturdays in the GDR. And that meant it was the same 6 days a week. And on Sundays, we had competitions in our sports. And there were no much leisure time.
How did you come to be selected for sports training? How did they find you?
It was in kindergarten. I was 5 years old, and people came and they were from the training centers. It was something like sports scouts, and they did measurements on the whole body. For instance, how tall we are or how flexible we are. And we had to do movements, and they studied our movements. They took our weight, for instance, and they actually were looking for tiny, slim kids.
How long were the training sessions that you had each day?
At the beginning, it was not as much, I should say. It was 2 hours of ballet exercise and how to move. And then were 2 hours in the training room where we had a circle training also. And we had training on the beam, for instance, or the floor. Yeah, there were different exercises. And altogether, it was 4 hours a day.
Wow. Did you find yourself absolutely exhausted after that?
Of course, I was exhausted all the time, and it felt like I couldn't breathe right. It was like having a huge weight on my shoulders. Yeah.
What particular disciplines of gymnastics were they training you for?
I was on the floor, on the beam, and then 2 bars, but they were not even. They were uneven bars. And then you have where you running and a jump horse. Those 4 disciplines we had. But for instance, when you are doing gymnastics on the floor, there were ballet elements and acrobatic elements. And for that, we had a special training, even for the power, We had to do a circle training, like in common gyms nowadays.
And did you have friends within the group of girls that you were training with?
Yeah, actually, I grew up with them in kindergarten, and we all together joined the training in the center. But later, a few of them left for different reasons. And, in training, they just kept the best of the best. So, and the older I were getting, the fewer of my original friends were there.
What were the trainers like? How did they treat you?
At first, it was a bunch of trainers, because for every session there were several trainers. And at first, it was not so personal. They just wanted to select, I would say, who is good for training or who is not. And they just wanted to keep the most promising. And later we have more personalized trainers, but they were strict from the beginning and even got physical with us if something was wrong, and they were yelling often. And from the beginning, when I started in training, I always feared them. We all did. We were scared for punishment or that we would kicked out. The main motivation was fear, I would say. Yeah.
Did they hit you if you did something wrong?
Yes, most of the time we had to repeat everything if it wasn't perfect. And even when we were exhausted or we were in pain, it doesn't matter for them. It was cruel at the time. And I often cried, and for crying you got punished too. So we had always pull ourselves together. And later it was difficult for the girls to comfort others because everyone was in pain. And yeah, it wasn't easy. Yeah.
So did you talk amongst your fellow gymnasts about what this treatment was like and how awful it was?
In secret, yes. Most of the time when we were in the restroom, in the bathroom, and we even talked about how we injured ourselves, that we have a break, but it doesn't work out this way. So we talked, but not very much. So
were your parents aware of the physical abuse that you were getting from the trainers?
I think not much, because at first they were not allowed in the training center. That meant every day they could do with us how they wished. And the parents were allowed only on Sundays when the competitions were, but only to certain Sundays, not every Sunday. And for instance, when we had training camps, we would drive outside the city and stay there for a week or for 14 days. And the parents were not there whatsoever. We even lived with families we didn't know, and we were alone. They separated us from our parents on purpose.
That sounds really tough for somebody who was the age you were at the time.
Yes, I cried a lot during this time in bed in the evening under the blanket when no one could hear me.
That's awful. At what age did they start having you competing in competitions?
It was, I would say, from the beginning, everything was a competition, because they wanted to select the best from the start. And when you weren't on the top, you had no value for them, at least. So, and they would kick out a lot of kids who doesn't make it. Yeah.
So at this point, gymnastics is almost your complete focus in life.
It was. Not almost, it was, definitely.
At what age do they start giving you medical supplements or pills?
I think it was when I was 1.5 years there, when I was 8.5 or 9 years old. It started. It was before we hit puberty. So,
What did they say these pills were for?
they told us it was good for the bones and like you were getting calcium. And they told us it's vitamin pills. And we trusted them because most of the day they were with us. And we trusted our trainers in that sense.
Were your parents aware that they were giving you these pills?
Actually, they gave my mother those pills, and I had to take them at breakfast, but they did it in a loose package. There were nothing on it where she could read it or something. They just told her, your daughter had to take it. And even when we have holidays, they told her she has to train even at home, even when was not officially training, that I would not grow anymore, that I will keep being tiny. She thought with this kind of intense training I would not grow. But she didn't know that the pills actually were doing it.
Unbelievable, the deception they were carrying out here. Presumably they were also carrying out medical tests on you during this period.
Yeah, this would have take place by SMD. It's a sports medical dienst. And the SMD would do tests weekly. That means they took blood samples, they took urine, and an EKG, or I don't know.
So an ECG that would check the heart.
Yeah. And once a month we had to get stool samples. And actually they took of our ears blood and tested for lactose every week.
Wow, pretty intensive medical examinations going on then.
Yes, and sometimes the SMD would, when we had training, they would watch us and we were doing something, for instance, on the floor or on the beam. And after that, they would take our pulse and they would write down everything in tables. Yeah.
So you were almost like human guinea pigs then?
We were actually, because they did it in school with whole classes. We were the C class, and at the same school there were the B class, and the B class didn't get the doping. And then they saw the difference. Actually, we were guinea pigs. Yeah. Someone from the victim Doping-Opferhilfeverein, from this verein, told me, 200 kids were wasted for one medal.
So let me get this straight. The Organisation for Victims of Doping are saying that 200 children would have been damaged for just one medal.
Yeah. Yeah, because every year there were coming new kids. They had a whole system and there were enough kids. So it doesn't matter when not for them at least.
And for the parents, I presume they felt it was like an honour that you were having this training. They were immensely proud.
yeah, for instance, my mom always told me, pull yourself together. You are so privileged. But I never felt like that because the way they treated us. And I was always scared of the trainers, but my parents as well, because my father was very ill and my mother wanted me in this training. Actually, she were the only one who visited for competitions. My father never joined. So she was very into it. But it wasn't my dream.
Were there going to be any extra privileges for your family if you were successful?
Not yet. Just when you get older and you are an Olympic cadre. But so many were lost on the way to the top. So I never made it to the top because I had my problems. I got injured and my health wasn't the best. And yeah, I didn't make it to the top.
Were you given any special equipment to help with your performance, like shoes?
Yes, very soft gymnastics shoes. You know, they were very raw and you couldn't even buy it in the shop, in the GDR. And there were special unit where shoe fitter were. And when I first came in this unit and I saw the whole bunch of shoes, I was so surprised. And when I got my first pair, I was so proud. And I wanted even to sleep at home in it. I was over the moon, actually. But yeah, that is my only good memory from the training. I did win medals because our team was very good and it was a sport club famous for getting medals on the Olympics. It was SC Leipzig, and that was my club. And later on, when I was in my teens, I threw everything away. I wanted to get rid of everything, but I kept photos.
Whilst you're taking these pills, did you notice any changes to your body?
Well, you know, when you are a gymnast, you have a certain core for balance. And if you would grow fast or hitting puberty, everything is going to change. And actually the pills we got stopped this process. So even when I was 13, for instance, I still had the body of a 9-year-old. So, and even when I hit puberty later, it took very, very long before I had my first menstruation. And it was hard for me because I felt I'm weird because girls my age actually were in puberty. And what I realized, I think we also got something like what changes the concentration. I was more focused and, you know, for gymnasts, it's like before they start an exercise, they have a mental picture already of the whole thing in mind. And that was way easier because when you do an exercise, you had to forget your surroundings. And it was very sharp. And before I didn't have that.
Did you experience any health issues during your training?
It started when I was 11. It was right before I ended sports. I got nosebleeds and they were not able to stop them. My parents wanted to help me, but I had to go to the doctor. And before I ended training, we were not allowed to go to other doctors outside from sport, but I did go to another doctor, and they had to put something in my nostrils to stop the bleeding completely. And at the age of 11, 12, it started that I had arrhythmia. And it was to the extent where I almost passed out.
Wow, so you were having problems with your heart aged just 11 or 12.
Yeah. And later in puberty, I had kidney issues and kidney stones because we were malnourished. And they had to take our weight every day. And it was terrible because they measured everything we were allowed to eat.
So you weren't allowed to have sweets as a child?
Of course not. Of course, we tried to cheat, but it wasn't possible. But we did get sweets. But later on in Stasi files, you could read even the sweets had doping in it or painkillers or something like that.
How much detail did you find in your Stasi files?
Actually, the Stasi after GDR, that were the first files they destroyed where they experimented with child's such a young age. But a few files survived. Mine did not. My Stasi file starts with puberty.
Now, when you're around 11, you're told you're not good enough. You're not going to make it. Can you remember the moment you were told about that?
No one from training told me. It was from one day to another. I had to leave, but no one was available for me. So I couldn't say goodbye to my mates, to the other girls, and I had to leave. My mom told me that I have to go. And then I broke down because for 5 years it was the only thing I knew. And I lost my friends at that date. And it felt like I'm in free fall because I never interacted with kids outside sports. And I felt really lost.
Now, as if this wasn't bad enough news for you, your father dies around this time as well.
Yeah, I was 11 and it was around the same time I left sports, but after that I was for 1 year or 1.5 years in other sports clubs, but not high-level sports. It was just 2 times a week. And my whole time management was chaos by then. And on top of that, my father died after a long disease. So,
I mean, you're possibly experiencing withdrawal symptoms because you're no longer having these drugs either.
yeah, I did start drinking when I was 13, and I was mixing the drinks with pills, so you have a stronger effect, because we had no access to drugs. So I did that, and yeah, by the age of 19, I was dependent or addicted to alcohol. So, and I did smoke, but I think for me it was to numb the pain, the pain I had inside, or to use this as a crutches, you know.
Wow, Kerstin, I can't even begin to imagine the depths of despair you would have been feeling at this time. How is your mother handling this situation?
Actually, she was stuck in a depression when she lost her husband and my father, and she went to rehab. And in the rehab, she met my stepfather, and shortly after they moved to Berlin, East Berlin, because he worked at an institute at the mathematics. Yeah.
Was he a supporter of the East German government?
He was active in SED, and I'm not sure, because in Germany you are allowed to take your own files, Stasi files, and if someone has died, and journalists, of course. But I'm not allowed to look into the files of my stepfather, but I suppose he was also in the Stasi because he had connections or whatsoever. Because you were not allowed to have such a high-level job, and then you would not have connections in any sense.
So, moving to Berlin, your move to a new school, what was that experience like for you?
Oh God, it was difficult, because I was in 8th grade when I entered in the new school. And in the GDR, you would grow up with from first grade until 10th grade. It would be the same people. And I was from outsider from the beginning. When I entered the school, I had another dialect even when I was from Saxony and going to Berlin. And even in my way of thinking, sports was everything I knew. And the kids in 8th grade, they were 14 by the time, and they were more into the pop culture and the music, what was in and out at the time, and I was lost in between, I would say. Though even the musicians, they mention it, I didn't know, you know? So it was weird. Yeah. And even my ability, social skills were not very good, because I never had the chance to learn it in the right way. Yes.
Because you'd always been told what to do in the past.
Mm. Even what to eat and how much.
So you're sort of losing your way at this point. Would that be a good way of describing your situation?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How is your relationship with your mother and stepfather at this point, with everything that's going on with you?
So they had a new marriage, both of them. And, my stepfather even had a marriage before and remarried my mother. And they were busy building this relationship, and I was a leftover. So actually, I was by myself. I had no friends. I was in a town or city, a huge city I didn't know. But I had to function, and I wasn't able to.
How's your relationship with your brother at this point? Are you still together? He was a bit older than you.
Yeah, we got separated with my move to Berlin, and my brother stayed in Leipzig because he was almost 18 at the time. He's 6 years older. And when I moved to Berlin, I was almost 13. Yeah.
How on earth are you coping in this situation? Is it the alcohol and painkillers that are keeping you going?
Yeah. And it was, I'm afraid, when I talk about it, it will trigger some stuff, actually. Yeah. It was terrible for me because I lost my brother, and until today, we have no relationship anymore. I didn't hear him for years now. We don't talk, and we were close when I was a kid,
I'm sorry that I'm bringing back some of these tough memories for you, Kerstin.
I think it's important to talk how, stuff like that in the GDR separated families even and teared them apart. Yeah.
Absolutely. This history is really important for people to hear, and I appreciate you sharing your story with me.
Sometimes I think that the scouts even looked in the family and looked for dysfunctional families to get full control over the potential gymnasts or sport.
When you are 16, you actually run away from home.
Yes, because I couldn't bear anymore. At this point, the only thing my parents wanted is me to be conform with the state and that I function in school and have a apprenticeship. But I totally lost my identity. I didn't know what to do. And I didn't function for years by then. And then I left. I was out on the streets of East Berlin by then.
So you were homeless in East Berlin?
Sometimes I slept outside or in empty houses. There were a lot of them. And because the GDR didn't take care of houses, and the people who rented the houses left, and we broke in and just slept on the floor with nothing. And I preferred it at the time because it was horrible at home. I couldn't stand that. And even there were things going on that was out of order, I would say. But I prefer not to mention what it was. But it goes in the direction of mental abuse and even physical abuse. And my stepfather hit me.
Kerstin, are you okay to continue with this?
Yeah. I went to clubs to forget everything, and I befriended people who were not conform with the state, not when it comes to appearance, because everything was the same. So, and I hated it. I was attracted to people who had a brain or their own mind. And then I met two guys, and they were very friendly. And for years, I didn't experience something like that. And they were from a satanic cult. And I didn't know that because they looked normal. They were not wearing black or something. And they started a conversation with me. And at first, I thought it would be interesting because they didn't mention about rituals or Satan or something. I found out half a year later what they were into. So it was not in an instant that I knew, okay, they are this kind of people. So
how does that friendship progress for you?
they mentioned another club where I should join. And I did, actually, and met many friendly people, actually. And there were 3 groups, and they were on different levels of extreme. The first group, I would say, back then there were a music style, it's called New Wave, and even, gruftis or gothics. And they were into dressing in black, and here certain groups like Joy Division or Sisters of Mercy and stuff like that, even The Cure. But I wasn't into it. But I met people also from there, from this group, and the next group. They were hanging out, drinking alcohol, and nothing mattered for them, and they were just chilling all the time or being drunk. And it wasn't attracted to me because you couldn't hold a normal conversations with them because they were drunk so much. And the third group was more extreme. At the beginning, I befriended 2 girls from there, and we started to go places. And later, I learned there were 4 leaders over this whole group, and they gave orders what rituals and what orders the people of the group have to fulfill. And I was part of it. And some of the group never met the leaders. They didn't knew the names. But it was, it was so secret. And we were not allowed to talk about it in public. And we even traveled to other cities and fulfill the rituals and order. It was a very dark time in my life. And some timelines are lost for me. I think, when you have trauma or PTSD, your brain is protecting you. You don't remember everything. So, yeah.
That's fine. That's fine, Kerstin. If at any point you want to stop, please let me know. Now, when I had the pre-call with you, you told me that this group was trying to incite people to take their own lives.
Yes. that was a rule in this group. You were not allowed to enter your 21 birthday. You have to be a sacrifice for Satan and commit suicide before that happened. And 2 of my friends I did find. Yeah. They cut their arms open, actually. One guy, for instance, was swallowing a razor blade. Yeah. And it was not funny for him.
How do you manage to get out of this situation?
I wanted to leave, but when you are in such a extreme settlement, you are not allowed to leave. It's not like a hobby you have. So it was dangerous. And I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. For instance, shortly before I actually left, I was in a group of 4. We have 1 flat, but the guy locked me in the whole weekend. I wasn't allowed to leave or to talk with anyone. It was such a control. It was dangerous for me. And one day, we met in the city of Berlin on a certain place. And from there, we were getting orders. And then we were going out in the different regions. And this certain day, I thought, that is my chance to escape by suicide or by leaving or by whatever. But I wanted a change so bad. And in this night, it was the 17th of September, 1989. And actually 3 people talked to me on a bench in a park at night. And they invited me for Monday to come in a house. They were actually Christians, and they gave me a chance to get out of this stuff. It was 2 months before the wall came down. And the atmosphere in Berlin was so tense at the time because in October, Gorbachev came. And there were a huge celebration, 40 years of GDR. And everything was tense and so much police. And there were even tanks in Berlin, in East Berlin.
Where did this Christian group take you to make you safe from the satanic group?
It was a normal flat, but Christians were meeting there in secret. Actually, on this Monday, I entered a flat and I had to trust because it could be also a trap you get in where the Stasi sits or something like that, because the Stasi were watching out for me. In this flat, there were 40 people, and they celebrated, a Christian service in secret and very quiet. And I joined them, and I'm happy about it. But it was a normal flat, and for the next 14 days, I was allowed to live with the family. But I had to leave my past behind and to avoid certain areas in the city. If not, it would be maybe lethal for me. Yeah. So.
You mentioned earlier that you'd done an apprenticeship. So were you working at this point?
It was 1989. And by this time, you would normally finished the apprenticeship. And I started 1987 as a apprenticeship as a gardener. And I did finish, but 89, I was not able to find a job. And after the wall that came down, it was even more difficult because everything was unclear, even when it comes to work. So, and at the time I wasn't working. I did finish my apprenticeship in June, but it wasn't easy, and I was mediocre. I wasn't even good. So, yeah. And I depended on people at the time because I was drinking. I had no hope in life, and that people took me in, gave me clothes, gave me, even money, gave me food and the possibility to have a shower. And for me at the time, I didn't take it for granted. It was very special for me, yeah.
You mentioned earlier your Stasi file. How early were the Stasi tracking you?
My file started when I already moved to Berlin. And it would be like you would have a letter in your mailbox, and they would give you an appointment where you have to be there. And the first time I didn't even know what it was. I went there and they brought me in a room with a table and someone sat in front of me. And it was scary because I was maybe 14, 15 at the time. And they did already know so much about me. And it was like they watched me all the time, and I wasn't aware of it. And then they asked me questions about other people and what they were talking and what my parents were thinking, and I rather not to answer. And then they got more aggressive. For instance, they said something could happen to your parents. Do you know that? Stuff like that. And I had to write down like a whole paper. And then it was a 50-minute break. And they got my paper and then write again. And if they were not exactly the same, they would question me. And altogether, the first time I was there, 4 hours. And I was so scared after that. And every time when I had this letter in the mailbox, I knew what is up. And I tried to prepare myself for it. But every time when I was there, I got scared. You can't avoid it. And there were even one time where something weird was going on. You know, there were only a chair in this room, and there were a handkerchief on the chair. And they said, take a seat on this handkerchief. And at first I was laughing because I was nervous and I didn't know what it meant. And, and that's it. And then I had to leave. And later I saw a documentary about, it was years later, maybe 20 years later. And then I find out what the handkerchief was for. And it shocked me. Do you know what it means?
Yes, I do. I think it features in the lives of others. What they want to do is capture your scent so that if they need to get the dogs onto you, then they've got your scent.
But it's horrible. I was so scared. So, and when I finally got my files, and it took a long time. I took my Stasi files in 2015 because I didn't want my friends being in there, and learning they were watching me or something like that. But, they do a very weird thing. When you read your files, much of the passages are blacked out. You can't even read who was it or so. Even today, they protect their identity, even when I was not protected, It is weird. But I still think my stepfather has his hands in it, because even my stepfather was looking for me all the time, or he was making sure that I'm conform and I don't embarrass them.
Wow, so the Stasi were trying to get you to inform on your parents and on your friends about what they were talking about.
Yes, but I refused, and then I had to go there more often, and they pressured me. But I didn't join. But I was so scared. I think after maybe the fifth or sixth time, they just leave it. But they were watching me in my files. There is a date. They were watching me until the 6th of September, 89. And actually 11 days later, I met the Christians, but the Stasi files ended there.
Wow, so they were even following you when you're with this satanic group?
Of course, they tried to get people inside this group because, they weren't interested in people hurt. The only interest was it conform with socialism? Not if people are dying or are hurting. That doesn't matter. Just their agenda. So, and that's unfortunate because I saw people die in this group.
Yes, indeed. When did you become aware that the Berlin Wall had opened?
Oh, that was pretty interesting. I heard it, but I didn't believe it. Actually, back then there were no social media or something like that. And it was mouth-to-mouth information. And at this time, I wasn't by my parents. So I went from Christian home to Christian home to Christian home because my parents don't appreciate that I became a Christian. So, and even our relationship was difficult at the time. And I lived with a friend, and she told me, yeah, it's in the TV. Yeah, he read it. Everyone can travel. And I thought she is illusional. And then the next morning she told me, yeah, we can go together. I will show you. And we entered the wall from, what is this called? Not Checkpoint Charlie. It was another. It was Sonnenallee. So there's even a movie about that. And we entered from there, and there were cars, like transporters, who had soldiers on it. And they had Kalashnikovs. And we were so scared. And we had our GDR ID. with us, and we entered. They stood in a long row, and we were going there, and we got a stamp that our passport or our ID is invalid now. So we didn't had the guarantee that we can go back, but we could. We didn't know at the time, but we were leaving anyway. And it was wow, overwhelming when we entered the West. It seems like the colors even were different, or I don't know how to describe it. The East was always gray for me, many shades of gray, but over there, I learned how true colors looked like. It sounds, cheesy, but yeah.
Oh, no, that's a great description.
Yeah. And then we walked over there, and the people were so open, and they welcomed us, and they were cheering left and right, and yeah. And actually, it was the 10th of November in the morning when we went. And before that, we never could imagine that we were going to the West. It was a wonder. And I know many Christians were praying for that. Yeah.
An incredible day, without doubt. What did you spend your greetings money on?
I knew you would ask that. Actually, there were in investory TV commercials. And they always had a Walkman. And I wished so much I would have a Walkman, and for that I spent my first money, but not everything. And I always wanted to know what Coca-Cola tastes like. So, and I bought a can, but I didn't know how to open it. It's so embarrassing. So I sat in front of my Coke and didn't know how to open it. Nice. But to my embarrassment, I asked a Westerner, and he was showing me how it works. It was so embarrassing, though. The main thing was a Walkman, but I know I did buy stuff who couldn't get in the GDR, Back then, for instance, I was wearing makeup or stuff like that, girly stuff, and I bought something good, The GDR stuff was underneath mediocre, so, it wasn't nice. So.
You mentioned earlier it wasn't easy for you to get a job. Did you manage to get a job after the wall came down?
I had actually, I believe, 10 jobs in the year after the wall came down. It was 1990, and it was like that because many jobs were lost. There were something called Treuhaus, and they bought everything. Treuhand and Treuhaus. They both were really bad. And you see, in the GDR, every company was VEB. It means it was owned by the state. So the state wasn't no longer. And, about many things. It was not certain who owns it anymore. And that's why many, jobs were lost, and I was paid cash the first year. And after that, 91, I got pregnant, and I was at home for 3 years with my son, and I was busy as a mom, but I stayed home. I didn't want him to experience what I did, getting in kindergarten so early. I was 4 weeks old.
Did you eventually get back in contact with your mother and stepfather?
Later, yes. And they helped a lot with my son, actually, because I got pregnant out of an abuse. This guy was out of the picture, and he was locked up in a mental hospital. So actually, it was an abuse. But I was a Christian, and I was praying about it, and I decided to keep the child. Yeah, I'm glad I did it. So,
did you tell your mother about what had happened to you at the gymnastics?
I told her after the government gave me compensation. I told my mom because I asked her to write down a testimony what it was necessary for getting the money from the state, because she is a witness. And she agreed to write down what she knew from the training. And it was difficult to telling her the truth, what the medication was really for. And she apologized actually for me, that she pressured me to pull myself together, even if I was in pain, or, she thought for a long time I was hypochondriac. When you imagine a sickness but you are healthy, she thought I would be a hypochondriac. So, but I was not, I'm 50% disabled because of doping.
And how is life for you now?
Oh, it's good, actually. I'm able to tell my story. No, just kidding. No, I'm good. I think it took a long process to heal in so many ways. But right now, I can appreciate that I went through so much, but I'm able, to help others with my story, or to be a warning sign for some people. And I think it's important not to forget. I'm able to forgive, but not everyone will understand that. But it's also for my own sake that I can close this chapter of my life. But I think it's important not to forget. It was a dictatorship, and it was a dark era. And I really want to say that today my relationship with my parents is very much better than back then, because when someone gets older, they often get softer and wiser, and they can now reflect more object things back then. And I really love my parents. I'm grateful that I have them.
The episode extras such as videos, photos and other content are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening and look forward to seeing you next week.